We really appreciate you joining us again here on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome in. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, inevitably, there's just things that happen during the course of our day, of our week, and we get thinking about them. And so, I love that we have this platform to really process some of our questions live time, both with one another, but also with you. And thank you so much to those of you that have been listening and weighing in. And I did forget to tell you, we have a mutual acquaintance who I ran into last week, who I kid you not has listened to 30 plus episodes since I saw him last week because he wanted to start getting caught up.
Nice.
And so he just won the #1 fan award. So way to go, Matt. But we love when you all take the time to respond to some of our curious questions. We love when you engage with us. So please continue to do so either on our website, which is curiositynotjudgment.com, or on the YouTube channel. But for this week, we wanted to get into a topic that was maybe hinted at many an episode ago when you and Mike sat down to talk, which was kind of that intersection of curiosity and judgment. And there are times when judgment is necessary. And so I wanted to address that a little bit today and kind of think through, are there times in our lives when we have to lead with judgment?
Yeah, lead with judgment and or judgment involved in the process. And so I think that we kind of named the podcast Curiosity Not Judgment because of some things that were going on in our lives when we first thought about this, and the fact that, at least for the two of us, the times that we tend towards curiosity versus judgment, especially at first, but even further on in the process, usually the better our outcome, and that sometimes judgment gets in the way of progress in relationships and with people, places, and things. And but I think over time we've realized, and some people have pointed out to us, that half the population will naturally kind of go towards curiosity when presented with something new, and half the population will naturally, it's not a bad thing or a good thing, just naturally go towards judgment and then maybe come back to curiosity. And I think as long as both are involved, we can get to that holy grail of discernment where we really have looked at the sides of the situation enough to know that we've taken in enough data to kind of make an evaluation or provide a definition or have that discernment. And we had always been of the bent that, the world seems to be so much in judgment these days. We need more curiosity, so we named it Curiosity, Not Judgment. But in fairness, it's really curiosity and judgment that makes all the difference in the world. But this week I was explaining this to someone, and as I was doing it, this person, we were at a coffee shop, and there's an outdoors and an indoors, and one of the people who was bussing tables came up to the outside door and was looking like they were trying to figure out how to get in. And I instantly got to my feet and ran and opened the door. And then I came back and realized that's probably where judgment was a good thing. In other words, I didn't sit there and wonder, I wonder if that person needs help, or I wonder how they're going to get out of this mess, or I wonder if they're going to have to put that down to open the door. No, I just went up and did it. Yeah. And so there are times when judgment is a good thing. I think quick action. I think if you told an ambulance driver or an ER nurse or somebody who has to have a quick decision, sometimes it's not good to sit around and contemplate what to do. It's better to take action. And I, having said all this, am one of those kinds of people who will often, if I don't know what to do, I'll start down a path, realizing that I'd rather have motion. And I'd rather be, okay, I can find out that this is the wrong path and tweak my path or do a 180, rather than, and my whole paradigm for my own self since my early Intel engineering days was like a jet ski. We used to have a boat and go to the lake a lot. A jet ski, you can't turn unless you're in motion, unless you've got the throttle. The throttle actually turns you. It doesn't have a rudder. So if you're not moving, you cannot change direction. So in my mind, action first, and this is why we said curiosity, not judgment, to kind of tweak me and you and others to the other side. But sometimes judgment first leads to positive things like quick action, appropriate action, especially if you've thought about it first. and it can be a good thing.
This is going to be an intriguing conversation, and so I can already think about that judgment can come first, and in our best assessment, we believe that we are doing the right thing to help someone, to intervene in crisis, etc. There may actually be some questions about judgment that come down the road, and that may just be something you have to deal with. But yes, I agree with you. In principle, there's going to be a double handful of things that you need to be able to make judgments on. And I think about children in unsafe situations. Don't go out to the street. There's cars coming. Don't touch that hot stove.
Safety issues.
Yeah, you're doing things, you're making a quick judgment to keep somebody safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then already, though, in the back of my mind, I can hear those little sub-questions start to formulate. It's like, well, if you don't ever let a child experience for themselves being in danger and learning from a consequence, how do they ever learn, right? I am not advocating for letting your child burn yourself or run into traffic. I'm not doing that. But I'm just saying, in this kind of matrix of curiosity and judgment, I know that there are going to be times when we, in our best motivations, do something with a quick judgment to keep somebody safe that might actually need them down the road to experience some pain to learn.
Yeah, and I think you could broaden that to just say that there will be times where we mess up.
Sure, absolutely.
And asking curious questions about what could I have done to do that better is a great way to evaluate for the next time. But I think that there's many times where quick action is appropriate, and even when it's not, and even when we screw up with a good intention, and as a parent, you generally have good intentions.
Sure.
Then it's okay to come back and be curious. So I think that the point here is that sometimes, the curious question is, when is it okay to have judgment first, or when does judging first actually lead to a positive effect? But even in those times when you do a judgment and it's not perfect, let's say it's only 80% of the right judgment, or maybe it's completely wrong, then if you still have a curious posture, then you're going to come back and ask questions and then improve for next time. And sometimes the only way to improve is experience.
Sure.
The Edsel car was designed, it's a classic Harvard business study where these people locked themselves in a room with a bunch of whiteboards and said, we're going to develop the perfect car. And they did. And nobody bought it. And the reason was because they never went out and asked questions. They thought they had all the knowledge they needed inside, and they didn't go out. And so the point is keeping asking the questions, right?
For sure. This is one of those really tightrope issues within the social services, especially in charitable enterprises or nonprofit groups, right? And you will inevitably have people on both sides of the argument. Those that say, let somebody crash and burn in order for them to come to the end of themselves, while others will say, no, be a hand up, be a help. You don't let them get to that point of depravity, because if they do, they might never recover, right? And so you are, without question, going to have people that feel very strongly on both of those. But, sometimes that judgment call in the moment is just you acting because it's instinctual. And I love what you said. There may be times that we act in good faith and we're going to have to go back and correct, just because of the nature of us being human beings and not being able to see the outcomes of our choices.
And again, this comes back to the whole thing about, and you could make a good argument both ways. Do you let them get to the end of themselves so that they then realize they need help and ask for help, or do you help them continuously, but maybe enable or disable their ability to help themselves, right? And those are two very good questions, and the answer is yes, both. There may be appropriate times to let someone, quote unquote, hit bottom, and there may be appropriate times to not have to worry about letting them get there. And I think with my own kids, I remember very distinctly all three of them being vastly different. And sometimes I would let them reap their own consequences, and other times I was out there overprotective. And I probably leaned over time to the overprotective. I tried not to, but it's situational. It's situational to the person. Different personalities need different things.
Yep.
I don't think there's any one hard and fast rule. So I think the curious person will say, in this situation, I think this is the best way to go, and I'm going to take this action. And hopefully, if it's the wrong action, then there's a recovery and there's a way to move on in a different direction later. But inaction is action, as they used to say, right? Not making a decision is a decision. And we never want to advocate curiosity to the point of inaction when action should be taken.
Absolutely. You know, and I think there's going to be a world of difference too between you seeing a situation where you physically can get involved and maybe help somebody from getting hurt, help somebody who needs assistance in that moment, versus something that you are trying to make a quick decision on. Typically, if it's just involving us, we don't need to make a split-second decision. There are, of course, you know, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Oh my gosh, I've gotten to that point in the day when my brain just shut off. But anyway, there are exceptions to the rule. That was the phrase I was looking for. Sorry. You know, especially if you're in traffic and you have to make a quick split-second choice. Do I veer right? Do I slam on the brakes? What do I do? Right? But if you are involved in helping somebody else, you kind of just, that impulse takes over, that part of your brain kicks in with trying to make a speedy decision for yourself. Many times, not all the times, we can allow ourselves a little bit more pause so that some of those introductory curious questions can begin.
One of the things that is keeping us from utilizing self-driving cars and letting that happen is people will, and you never should argue from the extremes, but people will say, well, how are you going to program the car? Because it's all algorithms. How are you going to program the car if it has to make the choice between hitting a grandmother and hitting a kid? It's like, well, you know what? That's a hard choice for a human to make too.
Sure.
So it's not a great argument, but it does beg the question, how do we make decisions that are hard and fast and work every time? And the answer is you can't. And you don't. And so that's the problem with machines is they only go by what we program them. They don't yet have the ability to think and process and evaluate in that moment the right thing to do. Many people would have a hard time in that situation, but machines, the problem with the machine is we're making one decision where it's always the grandmother or always the kid, and that's the issue that people have with it. And I think it's a good argument in that we don't have hard and fast rules. One of the problems I have with the amount of rulemaking we're doing in government these days is it seems like there's so many rules, and sometimes they're even contradictory in the regulations, and it's trying to have everybody be the same when the situation is clearly different and shouldn't be done in some ways. And how do you make up rules that regulate all that? And the other issue is there's always a winner and a loser. In this case, the grandma or the kid. And so making those decisions before the fact and for every decision is the problem. We would advocate stay curious and try to evaluate each situation on its own merits and make the right decision. And when you don't, or if it's not completely 100% correct, then ask the curious questions of how to improve.
Yeah. One thing I think we do need to cover, and maybe I've not allowed us enough time in this episode, but sometimes there's going to be the reality that we make a judgment and there is a cataclysmic outcome, whether it be somebody lost their life, they were seriously injured, there was loss of property or bad injury to property, whatever, bad damage to property rather. And we can get in that cycle of self-critical speak and, just being so down on ourselves. And so, in the car accident situation, if the options are slam on the brake or veer right, and you in that split second make a decision to veer right, and then you end up causing, a 5-car pileup and somebody is hurt or killed, then that thought's like, well, man, if I just would have rear-ended the car in front of me, it would have been damage to my own car and maybe some whiplash, but no one would have died, right? And then you begin to spiral down that what-if path. That is absolutely not healthy. So I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about there are just going to be times in life when you make a judgment call and it ends very badly.
Yeah, and of course that's going to happen, and it happens daily on little things. Hopefully, not so often on big things
Right,
like that.
right.
And beating ourselves up for things that we've done in the past, especially if you've had good intentions and you were just doing the best you can in the moment. That's a tough thing to justify beating yourself up over. However, having said that, it's not just so easy to say, well, then stop it. We're gonna make those evaluations, and I can think of times in my own life when there was some tragedies, and I think, what could I have done differently? I think we always question. I would be worried if you didn't question, what could I have done differently? What could I do better to help? Could I have prevented? On the other hand, beating yourself up over it to the point where you're frozen and no longer useful to the people you have left in your life is not good either.
So I think ultimately, as we're kind of debating the whole curiosity and judgment dichotomy, I think, again, to the point that we talked about at the very beginning, there's room for both at the table, and there's a necessity for both at the table. And so rather than saying it's only curiosity that's going to rule the day or only judgment that's going to rule the day, there has to be that balance of both. And sometimes it's not going to be 50-50. Maybe it's a 90-10, on the side of judgment. Like, I got to just make this call. We'll make some room for questions later.
That's right. And I think that was the point of the session today is that even though the name of the podcast is Curiosity, Not Judgment, we realize that it takes both. And we've just saw an imbalance towards judgment, so we were trying to say, let's move the needle, the pendulum, a little bit more towards curiosity, but both are absolutely necessary. And without both, it wouldn't work.
Well, and I love that for most of the situations that we encounter, we do have that chance to go back and question. I made a choice. What could I do differently? Or maybe I led with questions and I was frozen and I didn't make a judgment call and it led to this consequence. So now what do I do in the future?
Yeah.
I think always there's room for those follow-up questions to understand and dissect the things that we did or didn't do, how that impacted ourselves and our loved ones, and how do we rectify that moving forward.
And I think the other thing here, then, we've talked about our own selves, is honestly and sincerely questioning and being curious about other judgments that other people have made, without being critical or without denigrating or getting to disgust or contempt or hate. I mean, everybody, we've talked about this previously, everybody's on their own journey. And one person's judgment would not necessarily be another person's judgment in the exact same situation. And again, as long as it's with good intentions and it's based on the experience that you have or don't have, and where you've come in life, and you're doing the best you can, then just be careful to overly criticize someone else's judgment.
Sure.
And I think it's always okay to question it, but there's ways to question that get people defensive, and there's ways to question that help them learn and grow.
I'm thinking back to your questioning around the automation process of teaching a vehicle to drive, and inevitably there's going to be a situation where a judgment call has to be made. And I'm guessing there's a bunch of different areas and categories that we haven't even yet thought of where computer programming is going to be asked to make some determinations on issues of morality, issues of judgment around who lives and who dies. And to your point just a moment ago, we all are different and we will all make different decisions in similar circumstances. If there was 500 people in a room and they were questioned on, who does the car hit, the grandma or the kid, you're probably going to get a wide range of answers, I'm guessing. And so if humanity is diverse in the way that they execute curiosity and judgment, if they are different in their judgment making process, how do we then trust, this is, I know, a whole other AI topic that we won't tackle today, but how do you trust a computer that has been programmed by 2 or 3 people when they are a very small representation of how the populace would act on average?
So you're coming into the big question that is on, I think that's why people are uncomfortable handing over decision making to machines, is because there's that nuance and that gray area that does not get contemplated when it's machines today. Eventually, we're going to probably teach machines how to think, and maybe in ways that are, you know, superior to our own thinking on 90% of items. But these are very human questions that we don't want to trust to machines, because we don't want the machine to make the wrong answer when it concerns us. And I'll give you a prime example. It has been said that 50% of the cost in total medical care is given to someone in their last 6 months on average. So one could argue, for the good of society, we should just let people go, you know, before we incur all those expenses in the last 6 months. And, you know, if you were Spock, totally unemotional, or Sheldon, right, you would say, okay, that makes sense, let's figure that out. Or let's do it at 5 months or 4 months or under these conditions. And then you say, but what if it's your mom?
Yeah.
And that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the kid versus the grandma. Do I know, is it my grandma? Is it my kid? Well, then it makes a difference to me.
Yeah.
And
if I'm the grandma.
Right, or if I'm the grandma. So, and we don't want to hand that decision over to machines, because we're worried that we might program the wrong thing, because there's no nuance, gray area, or situational awareness in a machine. One could argue that many humans can't do that either, or that we don't do it well at times. But handing over an algorithm to a machine where it's always the same decision is the scary part.
All right, so let's land this and talk about a couple of curious questions. If you're in a situation where you believe judgment first is warranted, how do we do that really quick thinking and that really quick questioning to be able to execute a fast judgment?
Yeah, and I think that there's an answer and a further question. And the answer is, how much can you think of situations like that ahead of time, so that when the situation arises, you're ready to jump up and judge and do. And I think so that you can inject some curiosity in there. What do I want to do in situations where I see someone needs help and I can do it? I'm going to jump up and help. You know what? I've made that curious. I've done that question. I've made that decision. Now I can use judgment from now on. So I think that that's a great one. But I think sometimes in our lives, doing that and getting that judgment going first, then the second part of it is, once we've made a judgment and it turns out it may not be the best judgment, what do we do with that? And then those curious questions are all around, you know, what could I do to do better? Was I thinking, what additional data would I need? You know, what other things could be factors here? What other things should I learn before the next time am I going to be faced with that situation again? Or is it something that's just, it's never going to happen again anyway, and I shouldn't worry about it? And is it important? Let's not get hung up on if I made the wrong decision of which TV show to watch, and my friend at the water cooler the next day told me, oh my goodness, you totally missed it. You should have watched this one.
Yeah.
You know, who cares,
Yeah.
right? So what's the gravity of the situation? How important is it? Is it going to be happening to me again? And if so, and I think that I could have maybe done that better, how?
Good things to think on. So, as always, we welcome your feedback. You know how to find us after all this time, website or YouTube page. So thank you again for just participating. Thank you for listening, and thank you for questioning as you go along this great journey called life.
And take care.